TreVeyon Henderson could end up being the second running back off the board in rookie drafts. We'll explain why on this episode of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Kate Madjuk. You can follow her on Twitter at Kate Madjuk. And on today's show, we're discussing one of my favorite players in the draft, and that's TreVeyon Henderson, running back from Ohio State. We're going to look at his dynasty value, some comps. We'll look at what the analytics say about him. But, Kate, let's first start with a big picture view. What did you see from Henderson when you turned on the tape?
Explosiveness, Marcus. This is a physically gifted running back who we didn't get to see in a full-time role necessarily at OSU, but man, he ticks a lot of boxes in terms of that special physical gift that you love to see at the running back position, especially for a player of which you're looking for some high upside. 22 years old, he's a senior, former five-star recruit, 5'10", 208 pounds. So not a bowling ball of a running back, but when you consider the fact that he's got a little bit of a shorter stature, he's not 6 foot, he's got a thick frame. He's adequately framed. But where he wins is that home run hitting speed and his explosive playmaking ability that shows up every time he touches the football.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. He is a home run hitter. Now, we'll see what the testing speed is. I expect it to be pretty good. I don't want to say the official number, but we'll see. To me, that's what he is. He is a home run hitting running back that maybe isn't the between the tackles grinder that you want, but he's somebody that you want to get out in space and get the ball in his hands. He's not Jahmyr Gibbs, but he can be used in similar ways, right? I think Gibbs is a lot shiftier than what he is, but he is somebody where you get him in open space and he's a threat to score from anywhere on the field. Now, do you think he is a player that can handle a bigger workload in the NFL? Because we didn't see that in college. Part of that is just because Ohio State always had awesome running backs to pair with, but there was also some injury concerns here as well.
Yeah, there were some injury concerns. Missed some time in 2022 with a foot injury, missed more time in 2023 with an undisclosed injury. But what I have to say is, encouraging for me is the fact that we did see him play a full 16-game slate on through the national championship here in 2024. Didn't hit a career high by any stretch in terms of rushing attempts, but we did see him, produce, and we saw him continue to be efficient, and we saw him play all of these games. Now, I don't think he's going to be this typical 3-down workhorse back like we might look at Ashton Genty as. Mm-hmm. But I think the thing to consider when it comes to TreVeyon Henderson is the fact that whatever team drafts him doesn't need him to be a 3-down back. And I don't necessarily know that that's the role that's going to be most conducive to upside for him. I think if you get him in, you mentioned Jahmyr Gibbs, right? If he were the Jahmyr Gibbs and you found him a David Montgomery power back kind of counterpart, I don't think you need him to have 300 plus touches in a season, because I think that kind of usage is going to be conducive to efficiency.
Yeah, but I also think he can be a lead back in the NFL. I just think we just didn't see it that often at the college level, because he was always playing with another back. And this year was playing with Quinshon Judkins. I think they just wanted to keep him healthy as the season goes along. I talked to a couple people at Ohio State just to kind of get some background information on Henderson. I'm gonna read you one of the quotes that I have. They absolutely loved him at Ohio State. One of the hardest workers they've had over the last 10 years. He is somebody that they believe in the NFL can be a program builder. He's unselfish. He works incredibly hard. He's the right type of guy to have. And that's where I think we're going to talk about his NFL value and his dynasty value, but I could see him, Kate, going much higher in the NFL draft than anybody anticipates, because once they sit down and do these interviews at the combine, I think coaches are going to fall in love with him. In a class that's just not very good from top to bottom, I could see some teams in the 20s or early 30s being like, you know what, we have needs where other places, but Henderson is just the right type of guy for us with elite speed. Bring him in and we'll figure out the rest later.
I mean, all fair things. And you mentioned a lot of strengths in that conversation. Let's talk a little bit about his strengths. We mentioned the home run speed, the fact that he like literally, you mentioned this word, and I think it's the perfect word to describe TreVeyon Henderson and his running style. He glides. He doesn't run, he glides.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that I think the word glide really just kind of encapsulates the smoothness of the way that he maneuvers around the football field. And he is this incredible athlete. Let's hear about some of his weaknesses, because I've already heard all of your thoughts on his strengths.
Well, he's undersized for what we want as a traditional running back. Like, usually, if you're looking for these guys that go in the first run of the NFL draft, they're usually 215, 220 pounds. I wouldn't be surprised if Henderson comes in under 210. I think he plays really fast, but I don't think it's like a Saquon Barkley where he gets into the second level and he just changes speed. Like, he plays primarily at one speed, which is very fast, but I think you know what I mean. Like, there's just not that second gear where he's pulling away from guys. I think he's got good vision, but I don't think it's elite, and I just don't think he's the most elusive running back. And if you're comparing him to like Jahmyr Gibbs, I think that's the biggest difference. He's a little bit more straight liney, where I think Gibbs does a great job of stringing moves together and making guys miss in the open field. Henderson's just going to try to run past you, and it works pretty well. I mean, that's why he was so successful at Ohio State, but I don't think he's somebody that is going to wow you with his jukes and agility or anything like that.
I mean, here's the thing. It does give me a little bit more to hang my hat on, the fact that he accomplished these things at a big program like Ohio State that faced top end competition. Now, if these were the descriptors we were giving in the negatives column, and he was at a smaller program like a Boise State, that's when it becomes like way more concerning to me. So I think, again, at this point in our evaluation, kind of, we're nitpicking a little bit. And I think that this is the time to do it, right? Where we're balancing the pros and cons, because after Ashton Genty, it does feel like there's kind of a cluster of 3 to 4 running backs immediately after that. You could make an argument to rank in any particular order, depending on the day, which way the wind is blowing, your mood, how good your breakfast was, like whatever it is, you could make a case to reasonably rank these guys in whatever way you wanted in a different order depending on the day.
Well, again, okay, we're going to talk about fit in a second.
Yeah.
But Sean Payton, the Broncos head coach, was talking about how they need a joker, somebody that can play a lot of different positions and add some explosiveness to their offense. I just think there are going to be a lot of teams drafting in the 20s that be like, you know what? Henderson is the type of guy where we could swing the ball to him on the outside. He's going to take it 70 yards for a touchdown. There just aren't many players like that in this class. And I think that's why he has the potential to be the second running back off the board.
Yeah. And I don't really, like you mentioned, a team like the Broncos, like they don't really have a guy that can do what TreVeyon Henderson does. We like Audric Estime a lot as a potentially undervalued running back in the NFL once he gets that workload. But you look at the skill set that he brings to the table versus a guy like TreVeyon Henderson, it's not even close. He's not even close to the same zip code of athletes. Like, I do think that there are a lot of teams that, like, regardless of what you're looking for out of a running back, whether you're looking for a guy that's more of a pure runner, whether you're looking at a guy who just has a well-rounded skill set, like TreVeyon Henderson, I think, ticks a lot of those boxes. And because of the fact that he is such a good athlete, I think it can mask some of the inadequacies that you might be able to point out otherwise. There's a lot to like about TreVeyon Henderson.
There's a lot. Let's dive into the analytics because the analytics are going to be impressive as well. We will get to that next. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We are discussing Ohio State running back TreVeyon Henderson, one of my favorite players in this class. Selfishly, I'm hoping he goes to the Cowboys in round 2, but we'll get to that in a little bit. Okay, let's talk about the analytics. What does the analytic profile on TreVeyon Henderson look like?
It looks good, Marcus. It looks fantastic. Let's look at some of his 2024 percentile rankings, courtesy of PFF. His advanced metrics are astonishing. 96th percentile in PFF rushing grade, 95th percentile in yards after contact per attempt, which I think is more impressive because of the fact that you just that's not necessarily what you think of as TreVeyon Henderson's game, right? You don't think of him as a grinder. He's not a grinder, but I think with, a little bit of contact balance paired with the kind of speed, he's able to make that work. 99th percentile gap grade, 60th percentile zone grade, 63rd percentile receiving grade, and 100th percentile fumble rate. That's very good. He does not have a single fumble in his collegiate career on over 600 touches. That is something to be impressed about when you consider the floor and reliability of a guy like TreVeyon Henderson.
And to me, that's the most interesting stat here is the fumble rate, because we talked about this in segment 1, but coaches love players that are reliable, and they know what they can expect. And again, Henderson works incredibly hard. He was the leader on that Ohio State team. And if you're just going to put a running back on the field that you know is not going to fumble and they're going to create big plays, coaches are going to love that guy, and they're never going to want to take him off the field. It's why I really, really like Henderson in this class. And I think despite not being a workhorse guy at college, he can be one in the NFL. A couple other things that I want to mention really quickly. One of the things that we've seen when we've done some of these profiles is that a lot of these running backs tend to wear down as the season goes on. That wasn't the case for Henderson, and this is why I think Ohio State did a good job of managing his touches. He averaged in September 9.2 yards per carry, 5.6 in October, but back up in November, 6.6, 8.0 in December, and then during the college football playoffs, he averaged 7.1 yards per carry. That's fantastic. Like, he just didn't wear down as the season went on. But the most impressive stat I have, Kate, is that a majority of his runs came on 1st and 10 or longer, and he averaged 7.6 yards per carry. Like, he just gives you an insane upside on early down runs because of the home run hitting potential. Again, the analytic profile loves him. You watch him on the field. The eye test checks everything else. Checks every box. The coaches love him. What am I missing here?
I think the biggest thing that people are going to be looking at for TreVeyon Henderson, we're going to look at, let's bring up another advanced metric here from Player Profile, 20.8% dominator rating. That tells you how much of the offense that he accounted for specifically, right? That ranked in the 43rd percentile among running backs. That's not an overly impressive metric, right? But let's also, look at the context of that stat being that he is a running back at Ohio State where they've got a lot of receiving weapons. They've got, Quinshon Judkins playing alongside him at the running back position. Like, this is an offense that I think had a ton of outlets. So we can discount that a little bit. And then we can also just look at the fact that, as you mentioned, I think Ohio State did a good job of managing his touches. Now, I do think that based on injury history so far, and again, we don't have information about that 2023 injury that forced him to miss some time, was listed as an undisclosed injury. So TBD on the nature of that. But what I do think is important, and perhaps most important, is that in 2024 came back, played a full 16 games, and it does feel like Ohio State figured out a really good formula for maybe other teams to replicate. I don't know that necessarily if you're, spending up on a big draft pick and you have concerns about his durability and giving him 250 plus touches, like how much are you going to want to test the waters? I don't know. But I do know that, like, even if you don't ask him to take on a ton of work, he's not one of these running backs that like gets stronger as the game goes on,
Not
right?
necessarily. No.
Like an Omarion Hampton, for instance, or a Kaleb Johnson, who I think, they can wear down opponents as over the course of a game with more touches. They kind of get a little bit stronger. That's just not TreVeyon Henderson's game. So, like, I don't think you have to worry about overloading him with touches because I don't think it's essential to maximizing his potential as a runner.
Here's why I don't worry about the dominator stuff or anything. When he was a true freshman at Ohio State, he totaled 1,500 yards and 19 touchdowns on an offense, Kate, with the following players: Jackson Smith-Njigba, Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Marvin Harrison Jr., and Emeka Egbuka. I mean, like, the guy was unbelievable. And then this year, not only is he playing with Quinshon Judkins, probably a top 75 pick at running back, he was also playing with Emeka Egbuka, who is going to be a top 20 pick in the NFL draft, and Jeremiah Smith, who might be the best wide receiver prospect we've seen since Larry Fitzgerald. So he's played with a lot of talent, and that's why the dominator rating doesn't matter too much to me. But it's impressive with the offense with this many superstars, he was still able to shine just as bright as those guys. Again, there's just not a lot here not to absolutely love.
Yeah, I mean, even when you look at like the receiving profile, for instance, never had more than 27 receptions in a single season, never had more than 312 receiving yards. But
why are you throwing him the ball when you've got Jackson
exactly
Smith, Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Marvin Harrison Jr., and Emeka Egbuka?
Exactly, like that's what I'm saying. Like all of these kind of question marks that you can bring up, I think have really reasonable answers. Like, yeah, he's not the most creative receiver. So I'm going to go throw the ball to some of these generational wide receiver prospects instead. Like all of these concerns, maybe in terms of like some of the advanced metrics that aren't quite as appealing, I do think have some really rational answers as to why those things were the case. He broke out as a true freshman, which again, when you mention like the talent that he was playing with, the fact that he was able to become a featured part of that offense so young, truly, truly impressive. But I think even more impressive coming back from these injuries and being able to stand out from this efficiency standpoint, 7.1 yards per carry in his final season, 4.43 yards after contact per attempt. 21 design runs of 15 plus yards, 53.9% breakaway run percentage. All of those are career bests for TreVeyon Henderson coming out of OSU in the year 2024, despite the fact that he didn't need to touch the ball as often. I love TreVeyon Henderson.
So the biggest knock, and if you're wondering why he's being mentioned as like a second round pick, it's because he's had multiple foot injuries. I think we'll get a better idea what that looks like once we get through the NFL Combine. We always get some medicals that leak out of there. I think that could scare some teams off, maybe from drafting him in the 20s, and maybe that's why he falls to the 30s or 40s, because outside of the injuries, this profiles to me as a round one running back: production, athleticism, big school, multiple years of production. I can't continue to say one of my favorite players in the draft, and I can't wait to see where he lands. Okay, let's talk about his dynasty value and some player comps and where he's being ranked among the other running backs. We will get to that next. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL Draft Show with Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez. And now that the season is over, get the latest draft rankings, rumors, and news every single day. Find Locked On NFL Draft on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. All right, Kate, let's take a look at some values here. Where is he being ranked among running backs right now?
Right now, I think you're going to be surprised. He's ranked a little bit lower than you might guess. Looking at the NFL draft consensus big board, Marcus, this is your pet project, your baby every
Yep.
single year. So, everybody, please be sure if you're not following Marcus on Twitter, Marcus_Mosier,
Thank
um,
you.
he tweets this out all the time to give us an idea of what the NFL draft experts are thinking, charting this all out. Right now, TreVeyon Henderson coming in at RB4 behind Ashton Genty, Omarion Hampton, Kaleb Johnson, and then right at RB5, Dylan Sampson. This is looking at like the top 60, let's say. These guys are coming in, but as I mentioned, when we're looking at those like 3 or 4 running backs after Ashton Genty, it does feel like you could rank them in any particular order. And I have to say, based on the physical gifts, I'm a little surprised to see TreVeyon Henderson here at RB4 on the consensus big board, but maybe we see that change and shift a little bit coming out of the NFL Combine.
And one thing I want to mention is when I do these consensus boards, what I do is I take the top 10 NFL draft experts, and you know the names: Mel Kiper, Dane Brugler, Daniel Jeremiah. And one of the reasons why I do this is it gives us a good sense of what the NFL thinks, because a lot of times these boards are based more on where the league is projecting players rather than where, let's say, necessarily Mel Kiper is expecting these guys to go. And one of the things I looked like for TreVeyon Henderson is there are a lot of rankings of like Dane Brugler has him 49th overall. We have Mel Kiper, who had him outside his top 30. Daniel Jeremiah has him 35th overall. Matt Miller has him 44th overall. So a lot of these rankings have him in that 30 to 40 range, which to me indicates that he's probably going to be a second round pick in the NFL draft, probably more of a mid second round pick. Um, but then honestly, it doesn't matter too much for me because we've seen plenty of running backs get drafted at the top of the second round and go on to be dynasty superstars like Jonathan Taylor, Kenneth Walker, Brees Hall. That part of it doesn't concern me too much. Let's talk about some comps. Do you have a good comparison for him?
I don't. Give me
That's
yours.
all right. I like comparisons. Don't look at the overall testing numbers, but think about the style here. To me, he reminds me a lot of like early career Dalvin Cook. Dalvin Cook was a sub
Mm,
5'10" running back, 210 pounds. A lot of people worried about was he going to be able to shoulder a big load in the NFL, and yet we saw it. Like he was a home run hitting running back. Played a little bit at one speed, not necessarily the most shifty or agile guy, but incredibly productive. I think Dalvin Cook, somewhere between Dalvin Cook and Kenneth Walker, is what TreVeyon Henderson reminds me of.
interesting. Now, we did see, an injury, a season ending injury for Dalvin Cook here early on in his career. But
Mhm.
once he got past that, once he got past like his first 2 seasons, I mean, year 3, over 1,100 rushing yards, 13 touchdowns. Year 4, almost 1,600 rushing yards, 16 touchdowns. Like the numbers were not necessarily like jaw dropping in terms of efficiency. Only cracked 5 yards per carry once in his career. That was in year 4. But one of these guys that, like, man, you're looking for stability at the running back position. Once he was healthy, you saw a lot of stability that made him a perennial, top 5 dynasty running back. And when we're looking at, I think, upside, TreVeyon Henderson is a pretty easy guy for me to picture him cracking that top 5 value. Now, maybe the floor feels a little bit lower because he's not a guy I'm going to project for 300 plus touches every single year. But in general, I think, like we did see Dalvin Cook crack that mark twice, or
Mhm.
sorry, 3 times in his career. Like, there's no saying that he can't do it. It's just a matter of will he do it at the next level? I don't know, but the upside's pretty significant. So how do we value him in comparison to some of these other running backs, not just in this class, but like where are we kind of projecting him in terms of overall dynasty rankings if we're in a startup draft right now?
Well, one of the things that we've seen, like in rookie drafts, is that it's Genty, Hampton, And then there's a gap. And a lot of times in these rookie drafts, if you're looking at the ADP, Henderson is actually going ahead of Kaleb Johnson. And I wonder if some of that is projecting forward. Maybe Henderson is going to be the guy that's more involved in the passing game. To be honest, Kate, I think a lot of this is just landing spot dependent, because I'm looking right now, if let's say he goes to Cleveland at 33. And he's the feature back in Cleveland. I think that's a really good fit. What if he ends up with the Raiders at pick 37, reuniting with Chip Kelly, the Ohio State's former offensive coordinator? I think that makes a lot of sense as well. To me, I just want to wait and see, because I'm a little nervous that some team is going to draft Henderson with the idea of, let's give him 12 to 13 touches and we'll pair him with, you said, the David Montgomery type. But I also just won't be surprised if a team like Kansas City at 31's like, you know what, he's just the best player on the board. Let's draft him. And he's going to be our upgrade from Isaiah Pacheco.
I mean, yeah, if you're looking for like some speed and athleticism, I think that would be a really intriguing fit, especially if, I don't know, a Travis Kelce comes back. Like you need some burners. I know, they added Xavier Worthy, Hollywood Brown's going to be a free agent. He only signed a 1-year deal. So like, injecting that offense with some more explosive playmakers, I think could be huge. TreVeyon Henderson, probably a guy that like I can project a ton of upside for right now, but unlike an Ashton Denty, probably going to be a little bit more dependent on his landing spot and the offensive philosophy. But again, if he's going to an offense where he's having like, let's say 15 touches a game, at face value, that doesn't sound great, but I still think he could be extremely productive at that level.
We had some of the same concerns about James Cook coming out of Georgia, okay, where Cook was never a feature back at Georgia, mostly a receiving back. He goes to the right team. It's taken a couple of years to get there, and now James Cook is one of the most valuable dynasty running backs. I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, TreVeyon Henderson has got very similar measurables to James Cook. I wouldn't be surprised if we see a similar arc for Henderson, provided that he gets into the right offense.
And let's just point it out. I mean, James Cook did not have the production profile that TreVeyon Henderson had coming out, right? Like James Cook, despite being a second-round pick, never had more than 113 rush attempts in a single season. TreVeyon Henderson had that out of the gate, breaking out as a true freshman. Like, I think the comparison to James Cook in terms of concerns is something, but when you look at the fact that, like, yeah, James Cook went in the second round with this type of profile, who, even coming out still had like, I think greater concerns in terms of like his frame and overall size. Like, yeah, TreVeyon Henderson looks miles ahead of, I think, where James Cook looked at that point. So I think that tells you everything you have to know about like the excitement level and potential ceiling for a guy like TreVeyon Henderson.
I can't wait to finish up the show, and I'm going to go tweet about TreVeyon Henderson having 1,800 yards with all those guys on offense. Again, one of my favorite players of the draft, watch him this week at the NFL Combine. He should post some absolutely ridiculous numbers. All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty Football your first listen every single day. Go check out the channel on YouTube. We are free and available on all platforms. No Matt on Wednesday. He's actually at the NFL Combine. We'll catch up with him next week. I'm sure we're going to get lots of rumors and scuttlebutt from Indianapolis. So be on the lookout for that. Go follow Kate on Twitter at Kate Modjuk. I'm at Marcus_Mosher, and we will see you right back here on Wednesday.